My child, you have come through the final test, and I need your heart to become still before tomorrow arrives. What I am about to tell you will change the way you understand what has happened between us, so do not hurry past these words or set them aside for another time. You have just walked through a season that quietly reshaped your heart, even if you cannot yet find the words to explain it. What looked like another difficult chapter, another season of waiting, another hidden struggle that no one seemed to notice, was far more significant than you realized. It was a threshold, and before you step into what comes next, you need to understand why. I will not let you enter tomorrow without knowing the truth about what you have just lived through. The season ahead carries greater depth, greater responsibility, and a deeper closeness between us. And without this understanding, you would question yourself once again. You would wonder if you were truly ready, and you would begin to doubt what I am doing in your life. I do not want uncertainty to guide your next step. I want you to move forward with a heart that is firmly anchored instead of searching for answers in fear. So stay here with me a little longer and listen with your whole heart. Lay aside fear, lay aside skepticism, and receive these words with the quiet courage that has been growing inside you through every difficult day. What I am about to show you will change the way you remember your past, the way you understand your faith, and the way you look toward your future. You have called this season struggle, delay, confusion, loss, endurance, and survival, but you have never called it by its true name. It was a test. This was never a test meant to make you fail or to wear your spirit down. It was a test that revealed who you are when no one is watching, when the answers seem slow, when nothing feels certain, and when your emotions no longer carry you forward. You passed the final test, not because you never wrestled with doubt, not because you always felt strong, and not because you handled everything perfectly. You passed because you remained. You stayed when leaving would have been easier. You stayed when hope felt fragile. You stayed when prayer felt quiet, and when every act of faith felt heavier than before. You remained honest, you kept your heart open, and you never stopped being who you truly were. That mattered far more than you know. I saw you during the moments when you believed no one noticed you. I saw you wonder whether your quiet faithfulness made any difference, and I saw you choose integrity when no one would have known if you had taken the easier path. I watched you wrestle in silence, and still rise each day with whatever strength you had left. I saw you refuse to let disappointment grow into bitterness, and those hidden moments were never small in my eyes. They revealed your heart, and they showed that you had passed. You believed this season was only about endurance, but it was also about trust. Would you continue trusting me when reassurance did not come, when visible progress was nowhere to be found, and when there was no applause or immediate reward waiting for you? You did not always feel confident, but you remained willing, and that willing heart became the doorway through which growth quietly entered your life. That is why this moment cannot wait. What has changed between us is not distance but closeness, not pressure but deeper trust. Because you came through this test, I can now speak to you in ways that would have overwhelmed you before. I can lead you with greater clarity because you have become someone who can carry it. You are no longer the person who first entered this season. There is a steadiness within you now, a quieter spirit, and a heart that is guided less by fear and more by a growing awareness of my presence. None of that happened in a single day. It was formed through every difficult morning, every unseen victory, and every moment you chose to keep walking. You're standing at the edge of tomorrow expecting it to feel like yesterday, but it will not. Tomorrow carries a deeper purpose, and deeper purpose requires understanding before movement. That is why I am speaking now instead of later. If you move ahead without recognizing how much has changed within you, you will underestimate yourself again, and carry old doubts into a season where they no longer belong. Stay with me. Let these words settle gently into the places where fear has lived for so long. You have spent many days preparing yourself for disappointment and guarding your heart because hope once brought pain. That caution carried you through the test, but it has fulfilled its purpose. Now it is time to loosen your grip just enough to receive what is ahead. If your heart is ready to let go and trust me, then let that surrender begin here. You passed the final test, because when everything around you felt uncertain, you refused to become someone you would no longer recognize. Your heart did not grow hard. You held on to compassion. You remained faithful to truth. And you adapted without losing the person I was shaping you to become. That is rare, and it is a sign that you are ready. Understanding must come before movement, because without it, you would mistake your next season for another burden, instead of recognizing it as an invitation. Before you take another step, stay here with me. I know part of you has grown weary of promises about change, and I know another part has learned to be cautious because disappointment has taught you to protect your heart. That caution once served a purpose, but now it is trying to keep you from seeing what is true. Right now, that caution is keeping you from recognizing what is true. The truth does not arrive with spectacle or demand your attention through dramatic signs. It comes quietly, bringing a steady peace that settles deep within your heart. Its message is simple: you are ready. What I am revealing to you changes the way we walk together, because trust has been built between us. Not the kind that seeks recognition, but the quiet kind that remains faithful long after the excitement has faded. I can entrust you with more now than I could before, not because you became flawless, but because you chose honesty. Not because fear disappeared, but because you remained faithful in the small moments no one else ever saw. You have been waiting for evidence that this season is different, and this is that evidence. It is not found in fireworks or loud celebrations. It is found in understanding. What you called survival was shaping your heart. What you believed was delay was preparing you. What felt like weakness was strength being refined. Do not hurry past this moment. Tomorrow will look different because you will step into it with different eyes. When this truth settles within you, your steps will become lighter, your questions will lose their grip, and you will begin to trust more deeply because you will finally understand that you did more than endure. You were changed. Stay here with me. You passed the final test, and what lies ahead is not something you must earn through greater effort. It is something your heart has been prepared to receive. You passed the final test without even realizing it was happening. I watched you walk through it quietly, without recognition, without applause, and without the clear signs that usually tell someone a moment is important. It came without ceremony and without the appearance of victory. It looked like remaining when leaving would have been easier. It looked like choosing honesty when pretending would have protected you. It looked like rising each day with weary hands and offering the strength you still had. That was the test, and you came through it. You expected a test to come with clear instructions and an obvious ending. You thought you would recognize the moment you were being measured, yet the deepest tests are often hidden inside ordinary days. They quietly reveal who you are when nothing is guaranteed and no one is watching. This season measured your heart rather than your performance. It measured your trust instead of your results. It revealed whether you would remain present, while answers came slowly and your emotions felt worn thin. I saw you keep going when you no longer felt strong. I saw you continue trusting even when certainty seemed far away. I saw you choose humility when frustration tempted your heart to become hard. I know you questioned yourself. I know you wondered whether your quiet faithfulness mattered at all. Yet even in those moments you remained honest. You never pretended to be someone you were not. You refused to abandon your values just to feel secure, and you never exchanged truth for temporary comfort. Those quiet choices became the evidence of what had been formed within you. You did not pass because you lived perfectly. You passed because you remained faithful in the hidden places where only I could see. You kept your heart open when disappointment invited you to close it. You refused to let cynicism become your protection, and you kept listening, even when my voice seemed quiet and prayer felt more like perseverance than comfort. Your willingness to remain with me was itself an act of obedience, and your presence mattered. If these messages have encouraged your walk with God and you would like to help this work continue, you can support it through the QR code or the support link provided in the description. There were days when it seemed as though nothing was changing. Progress felt invisible, and hope seemed so fragile that you wondered if you had stopped moving altogether. Yet standing still in faith is never wasted. It is endurance. It is the quiet courage to remain where you are until clarity arrives, instead of forcing your own way forward. You did not rush ahead looking for shortcuts or demand answers before their time. You stayed, and that steadfastness formed a strength that could have grown in no other way. You believed this test was measuring only how much you could carry, but it was also revealing how gently you would carry your own heart. Would you become harsh with yourself? Would you allow shame to define your story? Would you let honest questions become accusations? Instead, you learned patience. You learned to recognize your limits without surrendering to them. You learned how to rest without giving up. And although those lessons never looked like victory, they truly were. I watched your quiet obedience take shape through ordinary decisions rather than dramatic moments. You chose integrity when compromise would have remained hidden. You chose kindness when bitterness seemed justified. You chose restraint when reacting would have brought temporary relief. Those decisions were never loud enough to draw attention, yet they revealed your readiness far more clearly than any public achievement ever could. There were moments when you believed you were failing simply because the struggle seemed to last longer than you expected. Yet the length of a test has never been the measure of failure. Sometimes time is what reveals endurance, because it shows who you become when the finish line cannot yet be seen. You are learning to keep living without constant reassurance, and that kind of trust is never easy. It grows when your faith is no longer carried by feelings or visible results. You did not realize this was the final test, because final tests rarely announce themselves. They arrive quietly after many others, revealing what has truly taken root along the journey. This one asked only one question: would you keep walking, even when the path became ordinary again? When excitement faded, and when each day looked much like the one before, you continued. That quiet consistency became your strength. I saw the courage no one else noticed. I saw you resist the temptation to numb your heart when the pain lingered. I saw you remain with your discomfort instead of running from it. And I watched you choose honest reflection over endless distraction. Those hidden choices refined something deep within you. They made your spirit steadier, your heart quieter, and your perspective clearer. You are no longer the person who entered the season. You may not feel victorious in the way you once imagined, but you are deeply rooted now, and that is a victory of its own. You may wonder why I did not tell you sooner, or mark the moment with unmistakable clarity. It is because recognition was never the reward. Formation was. You were being shaped, not applauded. If you had known every moment was a test, you might have focused on performing well instead of living honestly. Instead, you simply remained faithful to who you were becoming. You held on to your values even when they became costly. You continued choosing truth when comfort seemed easier. You remained teachable even when you grew tired of facing the same lessons. And you stayed close to me not perfectly, but faithfully, one day at a time. There were days when you felt invisible and wondered whether anyone noticed the effort it took just to keep going. I noticed every quiet victory. I saw every moment you refused to give up. Every morning you whispered to yourself to try again tomorrow, and every small act of faith that no one else could see. None of those moments were insignificant. They carried more weight than you ever realized. This test never asked you to prove your worth. It revealed what was already being formed within you. It showed that your faith was deeper than changing circumstances, that your character was genuine rather than performed, and that you could be trusted with greater understanding because you did not demand it before its time. You waited. You endured. You kept your heart open. You may still feel weary because passing through a season like this does not always bring immediate relief. Sometimes the first gift is awareness. You begin to see how much you have carried, how quietly you have grown, and how deeply something has changed within you even before anything around you appears different. That awareness is where true rest begins. Release the belief that every victory must be dramatic to be real. Quiet victories transform lives, and strength that grows unseen endures. You are standing here today because you came through something that once would have overwhelmed you. It is not because you became invincible. It is because you have grown. If these words reflect your prayer, leave this comment: "You are worthy of my every breath, Father." Let it be your expression of praise. Even while you were unaware, you were becoming someone who could be trusted with what comes next. You were learning to walk without constant confirmation, to listen without panic, and to remain present when the outcome was still uncertain. Those lessons matter. That is why I am telling you now, recognition belongs after formation, not before. You passed the final test, and what that means is not greater pressure, impossible expectations, or endless responsibility. It means you are ready. It means trust has been established, and the road ahead will feel steadier, because you are no longer carrying the same uncertainty that once weighed upon your heart. You did more than survive. You learned. You did more than endure. You matured. You did more than wait. You became, and I witnessed every step. Now that this truth has settled within you, move forward knowing your quiet strength was never overlooked, and your victory was never uncertain in my eyes. I needed you to walk through that season alone, not because I desired your isolation, not because I turned away from you, and never because you were unworthy of love or support. Hear this clearly, because loneliness has a way of rewriting your memories until preparation begins to look like rejection. What you experienced was never abandonment, it was preparation. It was a sacred quieting of voices so that you could hear mine without so many others competing for your attention. People you expected to remain beside you slowly drifted away. Relationships changed without explanation. There were moments when you reached out and felt unheard, unseen, and unsupported. During those moments, you questioned yourself. You wondered if you had done something wrong, or whether you had somehow become too much, or perhaps not enough. Yet what felt like loss was making room for something new. Space is uncomfortable when you cannot yet see its purpose, but it is often necessary when new life is being formed. I needed you to walk through that season alone because you were learning to rest your heart in an approval that could never be taken away. For a long time you found strength in being understood, affirmed, and surrounded by people who made you feel secure. There was nothing wrong with those things, but they were never meant to become the foundation beneath your life. Human support can change with emotions, seasons, and circumstances. I wanted to build something within you that would remain steady, something that would not crumble the next time you were misunderstood or someone failed to stand beside you the way you hoped. As the voices around you grew quieter, you were invited to hear something deeper. When encouragement became scarce, it revealed what was truly holding you together. When you felt misunderstood, it uncovered how much your sense of safety depended on being fully explained and accepted by others. That uncovering was never meant to bring shame. It was meant to bring freedom. I was leading you toward a place where your worth could rest more deeply than human approval. I know how heavy those days felt. I know there were nights when the silence seemed louder than any noise around you. I know you replayed conversations in your mind, wondering if different words might have changed the outcome or kept someone close. But your words were never the true issue. The timing was. Some people were only meant to walk beside you for part of the journey. Beyond that point, keeping them close would have required you to make yourself smaller, explain yourself endlessly, or slow the work that was taking place within you. I needed you to walk through that season because you were learning discernment. Discernment grows best in quiet places where fewer voices compete for your attention. When you are surrounded by constant opinions, it is easy to mistake agreement for truth. In the stillness, truth becomes easier to recognize because it is no longer hidden beneath the noise. You slowly began to notice what brought peace to your spirit instead of simply following what pleased everyone else. There were moments when you felt invisible, as though your absence made no difference to anyone. That pain reached places deep within your heart. Yet being unseen by people has never meant you were unseen by me. Some of my deepest work happens where there is no audience at all. When no one is watching, you discover who you are without performance. You learn to choose integrity without applause, to keep walking without constant validation. And that kind of strength cannot be formed any other way. I needed you alone because there was still a difference between connection and dependence that you had not yet recognized. Dependence can look like closeness while quietly weakening your trust in yourself and in me. I was teaching you how to stand without placing the weight of your soul entirely on someone else's shoulders. This was never because support is unimportant. It was because healthy support strengthens you instead of becoming the source that holds you together. You felt misunderstood because you were changing. Growth often creates distance before it creates new alignment. The language forming within your heart no longer matched the conversations around you, and the questions you carried no longer fit the familiar answers you once accepted. That disconnect felt lonely, but it also revealed that you were moving forward. Remaining where everything felt comfortable would have required you to stop growing, and I would never ask that of you. I know there were moments when you asked me to take the loneliness away. I heard every one of those prayers. Sometimes my answer was not removing the loneliness, but revealing its purpose. Loneliness can feel empty, yet it also has the power to make your heart clearer. It shows you what you have been holding on to, what you fear losing, and what truly remains when everything else has been stripped away. I was much closer to you during that season than you realized. I did not rush to fill the silence because silence was making room for something precious to grow. I remained steady while you learned to sit with yourself without condemnation. I watched you become more honest, more thoughtful, and more compassionate. Those qualities were quietly taking shape where no one else could see them. You learned to pray without trying to impress anyone. You learned to speak to me with honesty instead of polished words. You learned to admit when you were tired instead of pretending everything was fine. Those prayers reached me deeply because they were real. You were no longer praying simply to be noticed. You were praying to be held, and that changed something within your heart. I wanted to replace your dependence on external approval with a deeper confidence rooted in my presence. Human affirmation rises and falls with changing circumstances, but the assurance that grows from walking with me remains steady. As you learned to sit with me without needing others to confirm your worth, your heart became more settled. You became less reactive, less driven by the need to explain yourself, and more firmly grounded. This season also formed compassion within you. Now you recognize loneliness in others before they ever speak about it. You understand silence without rushing to judge it. You listen differently because you know what it feels like to be misunderstood. That compassion will shape the way you love, the way you lead, and the way you respond to the people I place in your life. I did not remove everyone from your life. I refined the circle around you. I allowed certain relationships to become more distant, where closeness would have slowed your growth, and I preserved the relationships that could grow alongside you instead of holding you back. Refinement is not rejection. It is careful purpose. You were never meant to remain alone forever. This was a season, not your permanent story. Every season has a purpose, and this one was strengthening your foundation. It taught you how to remain standing when support felt thin. It taught you that being alone is not the same as being abandoned. It prepared you for what comes next. Now you know how to remain in silence without running from it. You know how to listen without panic, and how to trust without needing constant reassurance. Those are not small lessons. They are signs of maturity, and they were formed because no one else could interrupt the work I was doing within you. That is why I needed you to walk through that season alone. I led you through that season of solitude, so that when you walk beside others again, you will do so with freedom instead of fear. You will no longer sacrifice the truth of who you are, just to be understood, and you will no longer settle for relationships that require you to make yourself smaller. Instead, you will choose connections built on honesty rather than performance. You were never abandoned. You were being refined. You were never forgotten. You were being prepared. You were never left without support. I was strengthening you from the inside out. Because you walked through that season, something within you has changed. Your heart has become steadier, your spirit has grown clearer, and your life is no longer held together by the approval of others but anchored in truth. That is why what lies ahead will feel different. You will not have to grasp for security or struggle to prove your worth. You will move forward with quiet confidence, knowing you can stand whether others walk beside you or not. I was with you through every step, even during the moments when it seemed as though no one else remained. The strength you carry today is evidence that your loneliness was never empty. It held a sacred purpose. While you believed you were simply trying to survive, I was watching things you never imagined were being measured. I was never counting how often you felt strong or how perfectly you handled every situation. I was looking at your heart. I watched how you carried yourself when encouragement disappeared. I watched the way you responded as pressure quietly increased, and how you treated yourself when answers refused to come. You thought the struggle meant something had gone wrong, but the struggle was revealing what had been formed within you. I cared more about the posture of your heart than the speed of your progress. When life failed to unfold the way you hoped, I watched to see whether disappointment made your heart harder or softer. When silence lasted longer than you expected, I watched whether you ran from it or remained present within it. When confusion came, I watched whether you turned inward with honesty or outward with blame. Those were never small moments. They were at the very heart of the test. Readiness is not revealed by how quickly you arrive. It is revealed by the condition of your heart along the way. I watched what happened in the quiet places where no one else could see. When there was no reward for remaining faithful, how did you choose to live? Did you stay true to who you were, or did you begin compromising just to relieve the pressure? Did you speak harshly to yourself, or did you learn to extend yourself grace? Those hidden moments mattered far more than you realized, because private choices become the foundation of lasting strength. I watched how you carried frustration, Pressure has a way of uncovering what already lives beneath the surface. When life felt unfair, when your efforts seemed to bring no visible results, and when clarity remained out of reach, I watched whether bitterness found a home in your heart, or whether you remained open even while you were weary. You were not always patient, yet you chose not to give up on yourself or on me. That decision may have seemed small, but it carried great weight. I watched how you responded under pressure, not because I was searching for reasons to judge you, but because I was revealing the depth of your trust. Trust does not mean every question disappears. It means your questions never become accusations. You asked why. You wrestled with what you could not understand, yet you kept your heart open. You never decided that silence meant I was absent. You remained in relationship with me even while understanding came slowly. That is trust shaped by experience. I also watched how you faced temptation, including the quiet temptations that often go unnoticed. I saw the pull to numb your heart, to distract yourself endlessly, to grow cynical, or to convince yourself that hope was no longer worth the risk. Those struggles were real, and you did not pretend otherwise, yet you refused to let them define who you became. You resisted becoming someone you would no longer recognize, and that quiet restraint mattered deeply. I watched the words you spoke when you were tired, because weary words often reveal what the heart truly believes. I was not expecting constant positivity. I was looking for honest faith that refused to surrender to hopelessness. You learned how to acknowledge your pain without allowing it to become your identity. That is a sign of maturity. One of the deepest things I was watching was your willingness to keep trusting without having every answer. Could you continue walking when you could not yet see where the path would lead? Could you accept uncertainty without being consumed by panic? Could you live without needing constant reassurance that every step was correct? You did not always feel confident, but you continued moving forward with quiet faith instead of standing still. That willingness showed me you were ready to receive greater clarity when the right time came. I watched how you treated other people while your own heart was hurting. Pain often causes people to become impatient, guarded, or consumed with themselves. Yet even in your own weariness, you still noticed the needs of others. You continued to care. You continued to choose kindness even when you felt empty. That was never weakness. It was strength being refined through humility. I watched whether you would try to control every outcome or learn how to release what was beyond your hands. Control often disguises itself as effort, but underneath it is usually fear. Slowly, you discovered that not everything could be forced into place. You learned how to let go without giving up, and that quiet shift showed me you were learning to trust my timing instead of fighting against it. You believed your hardships were a punishment, yet they were shaping you instead. I was never asking whether you deserved what was ahead. I was watching whether you were becoming someone who could carry it without losing yourself. Readiness has never been measured by talent alone. It is revealed through stability, humility, and trust. I also watched how you carried your own expectations. Expectations can inspire you, yet they can also become unbearably heavy when they remain unmet. Over time, you learned to loosen your grip on the timelines you once held so tightly. You learned to live without guarantees, and that was never surrendering to defeat. It was learning to trust. I watched what happened after your moments of doubt. Doubt itself never disqualified you. What mattered was that you always returned. Sometimes your return was quiet. Sometimes it was slow. But you came back. That return revealed far more than the doubt ever could. Finally, I watched your humility. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is honestly acknowledging where you are without pretending to be somewhere else. You admitted when you were tired. You admitted when confusion remained. You admitted when you needed help. And that honesty made room for growth where pride never could. Instead of closing your heart, you chose to remain open. And I watched to see that you stayed willing to learn. Struggle has a way of making people guarded. It can harden hearts and convince them to stop listening. Yet you allowed your struggles to soften you instead. You listened, you reflected, and when change was needed, you embraced it with honesty. You cared less about proving yourself right and more about remaining genuine. That kind of heart is where wisdom quietly takes root. You believed your hardships were evidence that you were failing, but what I saw told a completely different story. I saw someone learning to stand without applause, to keep trusting without visible proof, and to remain present even when certainty seemed out of reach. Those are the qualities that prepare a heart for what comes next. I was never watching to see how quickly you escaped the struggle. I was watching how deeply the struggle was shaping you. I was not counting your mistakes. I was watching your growth. I was not measuring your achievements. I was watching your resilience. You were never being evaluated for punishment. You were being prepared for greater responsibility, and responsibility requires a steady heart, genuine humility, and a trust that remains firm even under pressure. You displayed those qualities quietly, consistently, imperfectly, yet sincerely, and every one of them mattered. Now I want you to let go of the shame you attach to this season. Shame tells you that you should have done better. Purpose reveals that you were becoming ready. This test was never about deciding whether I would reject you. It was about revealing whether you could carry deeper trust without losing your peace. Everything you believed would disqualify you was, in truth, becoming part of what prepared you. The questions you carried, the waiting you endured, the quiet perseverance, and the honest wrestling of your heart were never evidence against you. They became signs of readiness. Now you understand what I was truly looking for. Not perfection, not flawless performance, but your presence with me, your honesty, your trust, and your humility. Even when you did not recognize it yourself, those qualities were growing within you. You were never being punished. You were being prepared. The very fact that you are here now, still listening, still open, and still willing to receive reveals the truth. You passed this test, not because you never stumbled, but because you remained faithful in the ways that mattered most. That is why I am speaking to you before tomorrow arrives. The timing of this message matters more than you realize. What is ahead cannot be fully understood after you step into it. Understanding must come first so that your heart is aligned before your path begins to change. Without that clarity, you would misunderstand what I am doing. You would mistake my invitation for pressure, and you would see growth as though it were another burden to carry. I am speaking now because I love you too deeply to let you enter a new season while holding on to old misunderstandings. If your heart longs for His presence, say, "My soul belongs to you, God," and share this video.